Now, for the ins and outs of this, we bring in an experts, my very dear friend, former National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien. Robert, thank you for doing this. We appreciate it. We looked at this in the first term. It didn't come to pass. It has here in the second term. Can I just begin by asking you, what about the Cubans? The military, the secret police, they kind of run the country. It's going to be, I think, one of the most difficult parts of this story. And I wanted to ask you, you know, from your vantage point as an insider, what do we do about these Cubans who've been running the place?
Well, Larry, Happy New Year, and that's a very good question. The Cubans need to go, and they need to go now. And if I was a Cuban intelligence officer watching what happened to Maduro, I'd be looking for a one-way ticket back to Havana or to Managua or to Moscow or Beijing and get my rear end out of Venezuela fast as can be, because Delcy Rodriguez has made it pretty clear, the current acting president of Venezuela, Maduro's vice president, that she's going to cooperate with Trump, and there's no place in Venezuela for the Cubans. They've ruined that country, and they need to get out.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez was, you know, her communist self yesterday, but then she last night changed her tune. Okay, that's important. It sounds like
she's a quick study, Larry.
All right, she's a quick study. I hope she's a quick learner. But do you think that, look, Mr. Trump has threatened, if need be, a second wave. And then when he says things like that, I'm not worried about the Chinese. There's a small amount in there, and he's going to sell oil to China. The others, Iran, Hezbollah, I think you would agree, relatively small influences. But the Cuban influence, now, we can cut off their oil. We can embargo their oil, so that would really damage them, because that Venezuelan oil has been sustaining Cuba. But I'm just sort of hung up on this. We encountered this in the first term. I'm sure it's gotten worse in the last 4 or 5 years. Do you negotiate? Do you think Cuba will say, we're just going to get up and leave? Or do you think military force will be necessary?
Well, I hope military force will not be necessary, and I think the message has to go to the Cubans very, very clearly, and I think Marco Rubio is the perfect person to deliver that message in Spanish to the Cubans, to his own people. His parents are native of Cuba, and to call the Cuban leadership, this guy Chanel, who's taken over from the Castros, and tell them, get your guys out of Venezuela. Look, they're going to leave Venezuela one way or the other, and Donald Trump has shown that he always gives people a chance. He gave the Iranians a chance to stop their nuclear program. They told him to stuff it, and we saw it, then he stopped it for them. He gave Maduro chances to leave Venezuela and go to Moscow or Beijing or Havana. Maduro didn't, and now he's in a jail cell in Brooklyn. And so the Cubans are going to get a chance to go home and leave Venezuela, and leave Venezuela to the Venezuelan people. Cuba has basically colonized Venezuela. I mean, their secret police, the Cuban Gestapo, has been torturing Venezuelans for 20 years. They take them to these dungeons and torture them and treat them very, very badly. President Trump won't put up with that, and frankly, the Venezuelan people now that they've got some hope with President Trump on the people's side, he always takes the side of the people, just like with Iran. He takes the side of the Iranian people. He's taking the side of the Venezuelan people. He wants to make them rich, safe, and healthy again. And now that the Venezuelan people know that he's on their side, I wouldn't want to be a Cuban walking around the streets of Venezuela with the people that they tortured and oppressed looking at them.
The actual legal remit against the Maduros and so forth, but there's a long list of people on there. We can't, it just takes too long to read. They're basically all part of the Communist Party that's been ruling Venezuela in recent years. What happens to them? What happens to Rodriguez? Trump is saying she's not going to be the ultimate president. She's not president really now. She's just a caretaker to restore order and make the place run in some fashion until elections can come. What happens to all those people? Did they leave? Did they change their stripes? I mean, this is a revolutionary situation, Robert. I'm not sure I understand how it's going to work. I'm not sure most folks understand how it works.
So, Larry, that's a good question. And what we saw when we took over Iraq, we eliminated everyone in the government, all the Baathists. We shut down the army, we shut down the government, and there was chaos in Iraq, and we had ISIS, which Obama famously referred to as the JV team, took over, and we don't want that to happen again. So I think what's going to happen is that these Chavistas that are in power now are going to be given a period of time to transition to the opposition in Venezuela. Maybe before, or maybe after, maybe they'll have a transitional government, and then they'll have free and fair elections. And keep in mind, Venezuela, even under the dictatorships of Chavez and Maduro, had elections. They were just fraudulent, or the elections were ignored, like the last election in 2024. So they've got a president, Eduardo Gonzalez. He's in Spain. He'll come home. We've got Machado, the Nobel Prize winner. And remember, these people have been lauded by the EU and the Europeans as the peacemakers and the Democrats. We've got Juan Guaido, who you and I met when he came to Washington and came to the State of the Union in 2019. He was the president of the National Assembly and the acting president of the recognized president of Venezuela. He'll come home. So the opposition has a lot of people. They won the election 2-1 last time. And so I think what will happen is you'll have a short period of time where there's law and order, and the current government will remain in place. And then they'll transition to being the opposition when they lose the next election.
One more question, just the last minute, Robert O'Brien. The Venezuelan military, all right, it's a large military, got a lot of senior officers. They've been living grandly off the people for a long time. They're very entrenched. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the War Secretary Pete Hegseth, can they negotiate with the military, bring the military to their senses, or will the communist-oriented military be a big problem?
I think the military is going to be, and it's always, be careful about making predictions. As Yogi Berra said, it's about the future, so you got to be careful about that. But the military should be the first ones to fall in line and to work with the new government, because they're going to take the brunt. If just as they did in this raid, they're going to be the ones who get shot and killed by the American military. We didn't lose a man in this raid. They lost a lot of people. They don't want to face that again. They don't want their planes shot down. They don't want their missiles destroyed, and they don't want their men killed. So I think that the military they're hard-headed. They understand that they'll be the ones paying the sacrifice. And I think they're going to be the first ones that want to cooperate with the United States of America and with our military. And we'll treat them respectfully. I mean, we'll be very professional, very respectful to them, and as long as they do the right thing. If they don't do the right thing, as Donald Trump has shown, they'll pay a heavy price. But yes. I think they'll do the right thing.
Yes, indeed. All right. Former National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, thanks very much. We appreciate it. Take care. Happy New Year.